You're listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast. We're an independent, general interest bookstore putting great reads in the hands of people in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hosted by resident Skylighters, we're here to bring you new and exciting author conversations, group reads, and bookseller chats. Happy listening. Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome back to the SKYLIT Books podcast. I'm your host, Natalie, and today we're so excited to welcome Kelly Barnhill to talk about her new novel, When Women Were Dragons. Kelly Barnhill has written several middle grade novels, including The Girl Who Drank the Moon, a New York Times bestseller and winner of the 2017 John Newbery Medal. She is also the recipient of the World Fantasy Award and has been a finalist for the SFWA Andre Norton Nebula Award and the PEN America Literary Award. She lives in Minneapolis with her family. Thank you so much for being here, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Did you want to start off by reading us a little something?
I will. I'm just going to read. The very first chapter is very short, so we're just going to start there and let people guess what's going to happen next. Let me take a sip. Hang on. Okay. Chapter 1. I was 4 years old when I first met a dragon. I never told my mother. I didn't think she'd understand. I was wrong, obviously, but I was wrong about a lot of things when it came to her. This is not particularly unusual. I think perhaps none of us ever know our mothers. Not really. Or at least not until it's too late. The day I met the dragon was for me a day of loss, set in a time of instability. My mother had been gone for over 2 months. My father, whose face had become as empty and expressionless as a hand in a glove, gave me no explanation. My Auntie Marla, who had come to stay with us to take care of me while my mother was gone, was similarly blank. Neither spoke of my mother's status or whereabouts. They did not tell me when she would be back. I was a child, you see, and was therefore given no information, no frame of reference, no means by which I might ask a question. They told me to be a good girl. They hoped I would forget. There was back then a little old lady who lived across our alley. She had a garden and a beautiful shed and several chickens who lived in a small coop with a faux owl perched on the top. Sometimes, when I wandered into her yard to say hello, she would give me a bundle of carrots. Or sometimes she would hand me an egg or a cookie or a basket full of strawberries. I loved her. She was, for me, the one sensible thing in a too often senseless world. She spoke with a heavy accent, Polish I learned much later, and called me her little Żabko, and as I was always jumping about like a frog, and then would put me to work picking ground cherries or early tomatoes or nasturtiums or sweet peas. And then, after a bit, she would take my hand and walk me home, admonishing my mother before her disappearance, or my aunt during those long months of mother missing. "You must keep your eyes on this one," she'd scold, "or one day she'll sprout wings and fly away." It was the very end of July when I first met the dragon on an oppressively hot and humid afternoon. One of those days when thunderstorms lingered just at the edge of the sky, hulking in raggedy murmurs for hours, waiting to bring in their whirlwinds of opposites, making the light dark, howling at silences, and wringing all the wetness out of the air like a great soaked sponge. At this moment, though, the storm had not yet hit, and the whole world simply waited. The air was so damp and warm it was nearly solid. My scalp sweated into my braids, and my smocked dress had become crinkled with grubby handprints. I remember the staccato barking of a neighborhood dog. I remember the far-off rumble of a revving engine. This was likely my aunt fixing yet another neighbor's car. My aunt was a mechanic, and people said that she had magic hands. She could take any broken machine and make it live again. I remember the strange electric hum of cicadas calling to one another from tree to tree to tree. I remember the floating motes of dust and pollen hanging in the air, glinting in the slant of light. I remember a series of sounds from my neighbor's backyard. A man's roar, a woman's scream, a panicked gasping, a scrabble and a thud, and then a quiet, awestruck, oh. Each one of these memories is clear and keen as broken glass. I had no means of understanding them at the time, no way to find the link between distinct and seemingly unrelated moments and bits of information. It took me years to learn how to piece them together. I have stored these memories the way that any child stores a memory, a haphazard collection of sharp, bright objects socked away in the darkest shelves and the dustiest corners of our mental filing systems. They stay there, those memories, rattling in the dark, scratching at the walls, disrupting our careful ordering of what we think is true, and injuring us when we forget how dangerous they are and we grasp too hard. I opened the back gate and walked into the old lady's yard as I had done 100 times. The chickens were silent. The cicadas stopped humming and the birds stopped calling. The old lady was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there in the center of the yard, I saw a dragon sitting on its bottom, midway between the tomatoes and the shed. It had an astonished expression on its enormous face. It stared at its hands. It stared at its feet. It craned its neck behind itself to get a load of its wings. I didn't cry out. I didn't run away. I didn't even move. I simply stood, rooted to the ground, and stared at the dragon. Finally, because I had come to see the little old lady, and I was nothing if not a very purposeful little girl, I cleared my throat and demanded to know where she was. The dragon looked at me, startled. It said nothing. It winked one eye. It held one finger to its lipless jaws as though to say, shh. And then, without waiting for anything else, it curled its legs under its great body like a spring, tilted its face upward to the clouds overhead, unfurled its wings, and with a grunt pushed the earth away, leaping towards the sky. I watched it ascend, higher and higher, eventually arcing westward and disappearing over the wide crowns of the elm trees. I didn't see the little old lady again after that. No one mentioned her. It was as though she never existed. I tried to ask, but I didn't have enough information to even form a question. I looked to the adults in my life to provide reason or reassurance, but found none. Only silence. The little old lady was gone. I saw something that I couldn't understand. There was no space to mention it. Eventually, her house was boarded up, and her yard grew over, and her garden became a tangled mass. People walked by her house without giving it a second glance. I was 4 years old when I first saw a dragon. I was 4 years old when I first learned to be silent about dragons. Perhaps this is how we learn silence. An absence of words, an absence of context, a hole in the universe where the truth should be.
Thank you so much for starting us off there, and with Alex, who I don't think we learned her name yet in that first chapter, but
We don't, but we learned it. We
this
learned it in chapter 2.
we learn but this is Alex's story that she is telling us. And when I started reading this book, I'm curious how I may have read it if I had not read the dedication page, if I had happened to kind of skip past it for some reason. Because seeing it, I feel like I read this story much differently.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
it meant more, and it had more meanings and more complexities to it. And so for our listeners, this book is dedicated to Christine Blasey Ford, whose testimony triggered this narrative, as
Yeah.
well as for Kelly's children, dragons and all.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah, I mean,
could
so
you
here's
tell
the
us?
thing. Yeah, so let's just go back to, so it is true that her testimony did trigger this narrative, and I will talk about that in a minute. But one of the things that that was true in the writing of this story, as well as is true in my understanding of her testimony and what her testimony meant, and what it was that she was trying to say. Um, when I started this book, I started it in this place of total rage. And in fact, its original title was Rage Story. I started this book, I had this experience listening to Dr. Ford's testimony, who, by the way, let's just pause for a moment. Every day, I just hope that she's having a lovely day. I hope
Yeah.
that she's having a lovely day. She tried her best. She tried her best, and she tried her best to help people not make a terrible mistake. And just because it didn't work didn't mean that it didn't matter. So I hope she's having a lovely day wherever she is. So that being said, I started this story. It was called Rage Story, and I started in a place of total rage. I was listening to her testimony, driving in my minivan with my daughter, who's now 15 or was 15. She's now in college, and and she was listening, and I was listening. You know, normally she will make whatever playlist that she has on her Spotify go onto the car. I still don't know how she does that. I know it's a thing that people do, but I don't really know how to work it. So whatever, it's fine. But she does that so that, you know, we don't talk, because I don't know if you've met a teenager before. I love her so much. Anyway, but instead of doing that, I had the testimony going on NPR, and she didn't change the channel. She listened too, and we were both listening. I watched her body while she was listening. She's sort of leaning forward, and kind of at full attention. And I had this sort of jolting realization that I was her exact same age. I was also 15 when Anita Hill also sat in that same chair and also gave very similar testimony, and also did her best to try to get the United States Senate to think again, right? And who also was not successful, but her testimony still mattered too. And I just felt this sensation of total anger, that here we were, an exact generation later, that 15-year-old me and now my 15-year-old child, and here we were facing the same goddamn thing, and that as a country we had learned nothing. And yeah, that was a rough day. So I mean, the thing is, so I I went home feeling just this anger in my bones. I felt hot. I felt like my anger was, and my rage was larger than my body, was my experience. And I went home and I thought, I'm going to write a short story about a bunch of 1950s housewives who turn into dragons and eat their husbands and any other man who wronged them. And that's what I'm going to do right now. Ah! Right? I was so mad. And so I sat down, I called it Rage Story. And I started writing the story. But here's the thing about rage. Rage is so interesting. And I think it is worth examining, particularly as women, because women in this country and women in, I think, just generally in I don't know how prevalent this is true cross culturally, but certainly this is true in the culture that I was raised. That we were raised to really distrust rage and to see it as unfeminine and to see it as that's not how you get things done, right? Nobody likes an angry woman. All of those things, all of those little messages that even if they're not said, they're implied, and you sort of internalize this. And I had internalized this and was very much resistant to my own rage for much of my life. And I probably raised my kids that way too, without even realizing it, right? Because that's how culture transmits through the things that we don't notice that we're doing, right? And how frustrating that is, and how and what a mistake that is, because rage is, we don't stay in rage, right? Rage exists to transform. And it is a very powerful experience. It allows us to sort of burn the chaff away. It's a refiner's fire. And so when I thought that I was writing a book about rage, or a story about rage, it was originally supposed to be a short story that got out of hand by accident. And but I realized very quickly that I wasn't actually writing about rage. I mean, rage was the medium, and rage exists as a through line throughout the story. But really, it's a story about memory and trauma. And of course, that is what the core of Dr. Ford's testimony was as well. This has nothing, in a lot of ways, this book has nothing to do with her. It has nothing to do with her story. It has nothing to do with any of that.
No.
But her testimony was the catalyst that made this happen. And but that what she was trying to teach us about how memory works, and how trauma lives in the brain, and how we have these memories of pain or violence or degradation or whatever, all of these terrible memories that get shunted away, but they get stuck, right? And they're disruptive. And so that is what she was trying to show us in that testimony, through really, I mean, and she was quite clear, but I don't think even I understood it at the time. I had to go back and read through it again to really see what she was trying to say. So anyway, so yeah, I mean, I think that, but particularly in that first chapter, I didn't even put that together until later, that that a lot of that first chapter was in an oblique way responding to how she taught us all about the hippocampus, whatever she did, but also really she taught America about how these memories persist and how they can disrupt a psyche over time, and how damaging they are to all of us, really.
And to, like, she was showing us at her age, and in this story we see how that affects Alex from that time that she first sees a dragon and is introduced to the concept of silence and forgetting, and what the possibility of remembering offers. So this story is so much about rage and anger, but you can tell us a little bit about the idea of transformation, that anger that you talked about, the idea of transformation, and what happens when we make space for that anger, how it can lead to so much joy. We won't talk a lot about the dragons themselves, because we'll leave that for the readers, but we can say is that these transformations that we see a handful of throughout this story are, when they're described, they are not painful, they are not like agonizing. What is agonizing is these women and girls trying to hold back that change and transformation. And when they allow themselves to do so, they're like, Alex just sees this immense joy and passion on their faces, and the ones she witnesses or the stories she hears about it. And that was such a powerful choice to make that catalyst joy with a creature that we know to be destructive too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the thing about change is that it's messy, right? I mean, it's always messy, and there's always fallout, and even positive change can have negative repercussions, and that's just what we have to that's what we have to accept, right? And so yeah, I mean, so I mean, there's a couple of things going on here. I mean, there's this sort of exploration of silence and like cultural silencing, and but also that silence was a way to really block out people's understanding of what that joy could be too, right? And that and so therefore this process of dragoning is seen through this this lens of, first of all, destruction and pain and loss, right? And all of those things are true, as well as, you know, femininity and being embarrassed by femininity. It has something to do with periods, I think, you know, whatever it is that people think. And of course, that turns out to be, you know, not entirely accurate either. But because there's this sort of, you know, cloud of misunderstanding, and this inability for people to sort of move through that cloud of misunderstanding, to be able to get to where the actual truth lives, it allows all kinds of misconceptions to persist, right? And all of those misconceptions come at a cost. And it comes at a cost of, you know, lives and relationships, as well as allowing people to take up any kind of space that maybe they might want to take up too. So anyway.
And then I want all of our listeners to buckle up, because for a second I would like to talk about science.
Okay,
let's talk about science for a second. I loved the structure of this book with these little letters and scientific papers kind of peppered in throughout certain chapters. So my first question, and we can get into the science of it, but my first question is, I would love to know about the choice to make Dr. Gantz a man rather than a woman. He is not like unlikable in any way, and also you don't realize that he is a man until much later.
That's true.
Yeah, you don't.
Oh wow, that's true. I did that by accident.
It is because, let's see, it's Dr. H.N. Gantz.
Yeah.
So there's just initials, and you have no, as a reader, you don't really have an idea.
I forgot that I did that.
Yeah, you did it. And so I don't think I gendered him either way as I was reading. But then when I did find out that he was a man, I was like, why? I was a little distrustful. I was like, why does he care so much?
Yeah.
All the other men don't give a shit about any of this. Why is he so, what is his end game? What is his angle? What does he want? Right. So that choice, which he sort of fits in with this group of characters of an older generation. Yeah. And he is extremely lovable, and we'll get to that in a minute, but I was curious about that choice to sort of make the person one of the people most interested in understanding and filling that gap of silence with information and hopefully truth. Someone who was sort of an outside character in terms of gender.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's such an interesting question. So I mean, first of all, the Gantz bits were really fun for me to write, because his entire arc is is told in these like little kind of patchwork sort of ways, right? And so it gives the reader a chance to sort of to see his changing understanding and his changing understanding through this place of curiosity and pure scientific joy. It's another kind of joy, right? And as well as you know, somebody who is a humble enough scientist to be able to know that which he does not know, and to be completely sort of like who buys into the scientific process to that degree, right? I think that is the necessary sort of personality trait that sometimes not everybody gets, right?
Mhm.
And that everything that I find out might be like undone by later research, and that's how research works, and that's why we do this. We're all laboring in this field. We're only trying to find our one tiny piece of the elephant, and I'm not going to be able to understand what the elephant looks like, right? And so yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't really make a conscious choice to make him male. He just was. But in a lot of ways, he and there's a librarian. I was always a librarian. God bless librarians. Oh man, I just feel like all conversations need to be 90% loving up on librarians. And but he and Mrs. Kaczynska, they really are kind. They kind of occupy sort of they are they're kind of twins in a way,
Mhm.
and that they're doing the same work, but it's happening in different spheres, right? Um,
Yeah.
uh, you know, both of them are fully committed to this idea of scientific inquiry and scientific research in the face of blacklisting and silencing and you know the destruction of careers, all this stuff that was happening, and finding different ways of doing it. Whereas you know, Mrs. Kaczynska is much more on the ground. She is a doer. You know, she's the one who like gets the research dollars to the people who need to. She's the one who's like protecting people. She's like moving all kinds of stuff behind the scenes in all kinds of ways that you is hinted at in the book, but we don't actually always see because like
Yeah.
her story is way bigger than what's in this book, right?
Yeah.
And whereas, and which is true of Dr. Gantz too. Whereas Dr. Gantz is in a his story and his arc is purely um, in that realm of scientific curiosity and scientific work. He is somebody who is completely married to his work to the to the point where he's not super engaged with other stuff and gets himself in trouble too. And honestly, I mean, there is a lot of my own grandfather in him as well, who was also a scientist and and also a sort of a pure research kind of a person. He was the head of psychiatry at St. Mary's Hospital and was like really pushing a lot of sort of understanding of the brain and mind and all this stuff for his entire life. And that sort of that sense of pure curiosity and joy in learning. That's where a lot of that comes from. So I didn't have to do a lot in terms of making like specific choices when it came to Dr. Gantz. Like his work just kind of showed up. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
well, all that done. Thank you, sir.
Well, and I just, while you were saying that, and you mentioned Miss Kaczynska, our beloved librarian, I thought of a fun parallel, which is sort of that Dr. Gantz is, anytime he's asked a question or people are asking him about dragons or his research or anything, a lot of the times his answer is either that he doesn't know or there's not enough information and we don't know.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, anytime anyone says anything to Alex, usually she says, how did Miss Kaczynska know that? She knows everything. So the two of them, while you were answering that question, I was thinking about that parallel between the two of them, how it's very interesting that they are working towards a similar goal, and they are working together in kind of two different spheres.
Yes.
And there is a lot that she does not know. However, she knows a hell of a lot. She knows a hell of a lot. She's got like hands in a bunch of different places, and she's got eyes all over the place, and she knows when a lot of things are happening.
Yeah. She shows up right when the cops show up. Like she just
she knows. Yeah, she shows up at Alex's apartment without Alex having ever known anything.
Yeah. She's like, what? I'm a librarian.
Yeah, I know stuff.
Yeah, she was also really fun to write. God, she was fun to write. Yeah, and so I mean, what was also particularly fun about writing her is that, and again, she has, there's more to the story than what you see, because we're only seeing this through Alex's point of view. We see some bits from Dr. Gantz's point of view, but we only see bits and pieces, and so it's really up to the reader to fill in those gaps and connect the dots, right? And the same is true with Mrs. Kaczynska too. But what's so interesting, and she tells this to Alex, that she sort of has occupied many disparate kinds of worlds. And she was the genius daughter of immigrant farmers who like had a teacher who was able to like get her a spot, to like help her like make her way into one of the finest universities in America, and where she ends up like having access to this this massive fortune, and instead of like choosing that kind of life, because she's like, yeah, no, thank you to all of you people, she returns to the town that was very close to the farm that she grew up. She returns to that place, and just manages to she's an extremely pragmatic person, right? She's like, oh, this needs to happen. Well, then let's make that happen. Oh, these people need to be together. Let's make that happen. Oh, I need to know all of these things. Let's make sure I know all of those things. Like that's just her personality and how she sort of approaches the world, and does it in an extremely no nonsense. And it's okay. It's already done. Sort of like that's just how she does, and so God bless her for being there. She also is one of those people that doesn't really suffer fools.
No, so, she absolutely does not
at all. So sometimes I was a little terrified of her, because I've always like had this incredible soft spot in my heart for formidable women who terrify me, right? So I loved writing her, but I was like, oh yeah, I would like you quaking if you were here. So.
And then I want to talk about Beatrice.
Oh,
sweet little Beatrice. We're not gonna. I just finished reading the book last night and got to like her final little acts, and she is a little firecracker.
Yeah,
she is so spunky, and I think we're going to dance around some of the details of her life so that we don't spoil things for people. However, so Beatrice is Alex's cousin, and through certain events, Beatrice is adopted into Alex's family, and her mother tells her, this is your sister. And you're like, she is your sister. She has always been your sister, and she will forever be your sister. And that is it. That is the bottom line. There are no questions. We do not ask questions. And so throughout no more questions, no no room for questions. And throughout the book, you do this sort of very like in the head sort of trauma response silence thing where Alex will say like Beatrice or my cousin Beatrice, and then right after that she says no, Beatrice is my sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, where she kind of is reminding herself.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about the sort of the idea of Alex's voice and the way it comes along in certain places like that. And how she, and not just with that, but with a lot of memories of her mother and her father too, and her childhood memories, the dichotomy between forgetting something and remembering it, and then forgetting while remembering. Like there's so many sort of layers to that idea of what the truth is.
Yeah, the brain is so interesting, isn't it? It's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I read that book like a lot of other people. The Body Keeps the Score, which
Mm-hmm.
is a fantastic book, and I think everybody should read it. Especially now, actually, now that we are
Yeah.
all emerging from this national trauma, right? I was thinking about that a lot actually when I was working on this book, especially because, I started this book as a short story. It kind of got out of hand. It was this massive thing. I think I've written a novella, and now I can't work on it. I have to put it aside. So I had to put it aside for a while before I could sort of come back to it. And I came back to it. It was, the pandemic was in full swing. I don't really remember doing this. I don't remember really writing at all during the pandemic, but I definitely did because I wrote 2 books. And but that was another trauma response, right? Everybody's home.
Mm-hmm.
Like my house is this like just this awash with feelings all the time, and the emotional labor. I
Uh-huh.
think that was the complaint that I heard from women specifically. I mean, men too, but really I heard this from women. Just the emotional labor of the pandemic was so overwhelming, and it was for me too. And um, but I was thinking when I was working on this book about my great grandfather who died of the Spanish flu. I'm trying to remember. I think he died in the second big wave, or maybe it was the third big wave. I can't remember. But so it was not, it was not right away. It sort of like came through, and then it came through again worse. And so my great aunt Ruth caught the flu and almost died. And my great grandma caught it. She was pregnant with my grandmother at the time. And my great grandfather caught it and he died. Um, and It was actually for my great grandmother. It was probably her pregnancy that was protective for her because the better your immune system was, the worse off you would get. They would have this
Mm-hmm.
it's called a cytokine storm or whatever. Anyway, but my dad did not know that his grandpa died in the Spanish flu and the great flu pandemic until he was well into adulthood, right? And I just thought that was so fascinating because, there was this sort of that was another national trauma. That was another silencing, right? Where are the great pandemic flu novels? Like, where's the great pandemic flu pieces of art? Where are the pandemic flu memorials? There are two on Earth. One's in Kansas and the other's in Indonesia, and that's it. That's fascinating to me. It's like the world just moved on. And so I was thinking about that a lot when I was writing this book, and how and particularly too because this book is written in the form of the memoir. I really wanted to use that form. I really wanted to explore that form and the ways in which memory will sort of like reshape and reform depending on when we're talking about it, right? Memory kind of loops around itself sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though Alex is telling the story from a place of safety and a long life, right? And from a place of great experience, and a great sense of how the world has definitely changed. Even still, she still finds herself in really inhabiting those memories, getting caught in those like little linguistic knots around that memory. And even though she can see it and she can see herself doing it, she still does it again and again.
Yeah.
And in psychology, we call that a schema. These sort of like go-to thoughts that the brain will sort of like hang on to, um, and and they are actually sort of like they're kind of like grooves in a record. You can actually sort of see the brain being like, okay, now we got to go over here. you know and it can like there'll be very particular places that will just light up. Oh, I think this, and now I got to go here, and now I have to think this thing that might be a fine thought and it might be a damaging thought. I don't know. And so she has that too, and she has that sort of very typical trauma response in how she processes those memories, despite the fact that she's telling the story when she's relatively healthy and whole, and also honest about her life, right? So anyway, the brain is funny. That's really the answer.
And Beatrice is just like, there's the purity of younger children in her character who have like who know what dragons are, have like heard people talk about them shushingly in corners or around hallways or behind closed doors. And so she's drawing pictures of dragons, and she is talking about dragons and pretending that she is going to fly away and become a dragon. And it is just in our world, it would just be make believe, an imaginary play. But in this world where there have been dragons and there are dragons that are not talked about, she is just completely like shut down and told that it's not appropriate and it's disrespectful, and we don't talk about dragons. And we really see from her young age like what that suffocating does to her spirit and her joy, and how that creates a certain rage in her, in these moments where she gets really upset with her sister Alex, and where she is just, and she kind of like huffs and puffs around like a little kid does. And and she's just like, she you can tell she's like, I'm mad, but I'm sorry, I don't want you to think I'm mad, but like, you're making me mad. And even in her frustration and anger, and Alex is really the main adult in her life, and even Alex kind of shutting those things down for her and suffocating that for her a little bit, there's still an extreme kind of like openness and kindness within their relationship, where Alex still doesn't want to do that, because she is sort of coming to understand what that suffocation from her parents did to her. And she doesn't want to do the same thing to Beatrice.
Boy, it's a dark moment I think in anybody's life. It was just like, oh shit, I'm my mom.
I know.
I just did that thing my mom did, that like I even went to therapy about, or whatever, right? Like, I mean, just like down the drain. But yeah, it is like that was and even when Alex realizes she's doing it and realizes it's damaging, she still does it anyway. Like she can't seem to stop herself. And of course, that's the fear response, right? That particularly, in the face of traumatic events, and Alex has had a bunch, right? Has had just a bunch of like really crappy things that she has to sort of weather as she kind of keeps her eye on the ball of what she wants her future to be, and what she wants herself to be, and what matters to her. She remains fairly singular in that way, that I need to have this life, I need to have Beatrice with me, we have to be together. And so I don't know what all these other things are, but like that, those are the things that matter. And so what that means is that she's going to make a lot of mistakes along the way, and she's going to overperform and over respond to things that feel like they are threats, to what she thinks like the safe path is. And Because she just has a lot of fears of, what could happen if things kind of go south for them. And so yeah, but what was interesting, I mean, it was really interesting writing Beatrice, because she too was a very singular character, and probably, like this incredibly self-assured child, like self-assured in that the world is going to be fine, and it's me and Alex, that's good, like all of these things are
Yeah.
good, so like I'm pretty sure this is all going to be fine, like that sort of is her point of view. Uh, in a lot of ways, I, I did take some inspiration from one of my nieces in all of this. I mean, who's also the most self-assured child I've ever met in my whole life. They had an experience, and this was extremely scary, and like again, one of those things that could have been really bad, but ended up being fine. A stranger came into their house after the kids had gone to bed, and had come and wandered into her room. Um, Really scary situation. I was somebody who was just not really in reality, right?
Mhm.
And I think was just profoundly confused and literally just wandered in. But she wakes up in her bed. She's like, because they have their bedtime and you can read your books, but you have to be in bed. She kind of looks up at this person who's in her room, but she's so convinced of her own safety at all times, but also is like, this is unusual. Maybe I should check in with my parents. And so she just trucks down the hall, goes into her parents' bedroom, and she's like, "Who's the guy?" They were like, "What?" And she's like, "Who's the guy? The guy in my room." And so my brother like goes and like realizes that the door is open, and then goes downstairs and realizes the back door is open, and his neighbor's like, "Don't worry, I've already called 911," because there had been a stranger in the house. But
Mhm.
like, and so as scary as all of that was, and how it's sort of like, wow, this really could have been a bad situation, but it wasn't. Everybody was fine. Everybody's safe. But that child's response is so interesting. Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting? And like, wow, here is a kid who feels completely safe in their world, but also is totally assured that like there are processes still with this, right? And in a lot of ways, there's a lot of parallels between that and Beatrice, who I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, like, she probably should be falling apart. The woman that she knew as her mother has died. The man that she knew as her father has like abandoned them.
Wow.
Like it's just
Yeah.
like a teenager is in charge of her. What? And yet she has total faith in her situation that like this is gonna be fine. And like I go to school, I do my homework, we had spaghettios for dinner, whatever, that like her ability to be like and also like I played games with the kids behind the alley, all that stuff, is part of how she organizes her world and thinks about her world. And um and so and so which is why she's so baffled that people are angry at her, or upset, or she gets in trouble for doing this thing that feels super normal. Like I had a thought and I was playing with that thought. Like, what's wrong with that? It doesn't make any sense to her that she's drawing the thing that like burned down another kid's house, or that like another kid like lost their parents. Of course, she did too, but she doesn't know,
Yeah.
or whatever, that she doesn't know to make that connection, and partially because everything has been silenced. She hasn't been allowed to
Silence.
ask questions, so it's just like, well, I guess this is the world. Thanks. Okay, good.
Well, and there with the silencing, there is that because Alex is, well, there are multiple heroes in our story, but Alex is our main character here, and there the silences that she has sort of created in this world that she has made safe for herself in the same way that Beatrice understands her world to be safe. So everything will be okay.
Mhm.
Alex believes that everything will be okay as long as things stay the same, and
Right.
there is no change, like major changes. She
Right.
can handle everything that she understands.
Hmm.
Um, and as she starts to grow up and sees more of the world a little bit and has some additional experiences, she starts to realize how that worldview parallels the silencing
Yeah.
that the greater world has
Right.
sort of inflicted upon everyone in
Right.
regards to this dragoning. And there, so it's such kind of like a roller coaster to follow her through
Hmm.
that. It's that moment of clarity when you kind of understand, oh, like everything will be okay. How, even if it's not okay, it will end up being okay.
Yeah.
But I have to give it the opportunity to exist and
Right.
to come about. And that is a big part of her journey with joy as
Hmm.
well, in
Hmm.
regards to how these women dragoned, and
Yeah.
uh like just trying to keep everything locked in so tight, and
Yeah.
so like not allowing the opportunity for anything outside of what she already knows to exist, which is what we get so angry about with so much
Hmm.
of the world and all of the things happening. There's no room for other ideas or opinions because what we have is working. So
Right.
let's
Right.
not
That is a new idea. Therefore, I must fear it.
fear it. Exactly. And so it was really it was like sad and heartbreaking to see Alex, trying so hard. And I'm sure there'll be so many people that kind of really empathize or recognize that feeling of trying so hard to just keep your head above water.
Yeah.
And so there is no room for this one little detour that might bring me joy,
Yeah.
because everything could possibly fall apart, and that I won't be able to handle it.
Right, right. And that's the other thing too. I mean, as the reader, particularly because we're readers who are adults, like we know for darn sure that even though she has this idea that nothing can change, and if I can just keep everything just like this, we're gonna be able to like make this work. But she's not going to be able to, right? Like that's a fantasy. She has no idea like what a fantasy. I mean, the fact that she's made it this far is
Is a
like
miracle.
ridiculous, you know?
It's insane. It's the most
And
unbelievable part of this book, and this book is about dragons.
right, right. Right. I know that she's been able to make it this far. And of course, I mean, she has been able to because like she's got, like the one thing that her dad does is that he gives her adequate funding. Like
Yeah.
she's able to, because they have a roof over the head, they've got food on the table, they've got, like they can put clothes on their bodies, they can do all of that, right? And so I mean, Alex being a teenager, she just doesn't have the context. She doesn't have the understanding. Like, there's absolutely no way that this is sustainable. There's no way that this is going to be able to happen on her own. She's not going to be able to do it. Like things are going to fall apart, and what that will look like and what that will mean. But she's not going to be able to have all of these things together at the same time. Um, and and so yeah, but the thing is that and again, that's a trauma response that like I have to live by these rules, and it doesn't matter that the world is changing or that I'm changing, but like I have learned this one thing that keeps me safe, and so I'm just going to do this thing again and again and again, and that's going to be it, right? And so, which is why I mean, this is the way in which sort of like adverse childhood events sort of disrupt us when we're adults, because we learn this very particular sort of like manner of being and manner of thinking and like ordering of what is true, that doesn't match up with what we learn as adults, and that causes disruption and pain, and so Alex thinks that she is like trying to keep her trying to keep her family together, her teeny tiny family of two together. She's trying to think that she's like trying to keep them, because she understands what education is, and she understands what that can do for her, and she knows that that is a path that she could be on that can lead her towards a life that that will be interesting for her and joyful and a life of meaning. Like that's what she wants. And but she doesn't realize that that her silencing on the matter and refusal to even consider other possibilities, that in itself is putting her at risk, right? And is making her life harder. And the thing is that, like, boy oh boy, um, we can certainly see people doing that. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
we have seen people do this in history. We can see them doing it now. It is, I think, a very common. It is a very common sort of knee-jerk response that people have to change and new things and enlargening their idea of what a life can look like, what a family can look like, what a society can look like, whatever. Instead, it's just like, nope, no, we have to.
And then, so what do you hope that people do after they read this book? What do you want them to go out and do? What do you hope that they they can only realize or come out with as much as they're willing to put into it while they're taking the time to read it? But what do you hope some people may go out and do after reading through this
Well,
story?
I mean, obviously, I hope that, like, I mean, I certainly hope that everybody decides, oh, we should really fund libraries. This is like step one.
Yes.
Libraries are really good, and we should have all the books and stop with all the nonsense that's happening. And but then also, I think that my hope is that that we interrogate our own memory and we interrogate our own idea of what we think a life should be, and that we interrogate, like, what we think our worst case scenario is, right? I used to do this with my kids actually when they were young, that when they would really be afraid of a specific outcome, like, okay, well then let's imagine that happening. Let's do it. Let's talk it through right now. Let's
Hmm.
imagine this worst case scenario happening. Like, I'm gonna fail this class. Oh, okay. Well, let's imagine you failed the class. Okay, all right. F. All right. So you failed the class. Well, now what? You know, and like talk it through. You know, like, do I love you less? No. You know,
Hmm.
like, are you still
Yeah.
worth this? You know, whatever. And but like, but just generally, well, if that happens, like, okay, this is what we'll do. This is and whatever. Like the sort of like even when they had like kind of outlandish fears. Oh, okay. Well, if that happened, you know, like if zombies did attack, well, I guess that this is what I would do, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so but and I think that what has caused Alex so much distress is that she's so afraid of a very specific outcome, and so afraid of being alone, that she stops imagining what her life is. First of all, what her life would look like alone,
Yeah.
um, because obviously we don't live with our sisters forever, um, and but also, you know, if this should happen, like, how what would happen to us? Well, how would we maintain our relationship? How would we find a new way to be in the world? If she had done that, then maybe she would not have been stuck in that place of distress for so long, right? And so I think that that is sort of like the main thing that I would want people to do is to take a harder look at the thing that you think you're afraid of, and ask yourself if it is necessary to be afraid, um, and to ask yourself, why am I afraid of this thing? And and to start to sort of like work towards some place of wholeness around that. That's my hope.
Well, I cannot wait for everyone who grabs this book gets the chance to read it to decide whether or not they would like to dragon and figure out when our in this world mass dragoning will occur.
Right, right.
I I will be keeping my head towards the sky, waiting for it. Thank you so much to my guest today, Kelly Barnhill, for chatting with me about When Women Were Dragons. You can purchase copies at SKYLIT Books or online at skylitbooks.com. And thank you so much for chatting, Kelly.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.